So, no, I wouldn't say I have a passion for HR.
Welcome back to Human Resources for the People. It's a human capital revolution. Today we're going to be talking about the Vietnamese labor unions. I know this is a strange thing for an American to discuss, but it is something that I find to be really important. It's an interesting phenomena that you're seeing in Vietnam, and it's an interesting sort of concept to talk about. Of course, Vietnam is in Southeast Asia, and it is a communist country, technically speaking. There is only one union in the entire country. It is called the Vietnam General Confederation of Labor, which is an organ of the Communist Party. So it is the union and the state and the party are one and the same. The fact that Vietnam is communist is what pushed me to make this video, and it's a very interesting concept. So I saw this article a couple days back. The United States pushes Vietnam on union rights. And I'm not going to talk about Xinjiang forced labor, but the idea that that the United States has to push a communist country on union rights is pretty interesting, I think. And that's where we're going to discuss it. So, of course, the United States is urging Vietnam to strengthen workers' rights by following through on a landmark trade law. That was through the Trans-Pacific Partnership trade deal. And the United States got the pledge from Vietnam through the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership. But then, of course, I believe President Trump pulled the United States out of the TPP, if I recall correctly. From a philosophical standpoint, the idea that the Vietnam General Confederation of Labor is the only labor union in the country, and that it's the only one, and that it's particularly tied to the Communist Party, feeds back through the philosophy of Marx and the tomes of writing that have been done since his passing with respect to communism. However, what it's resulted in is the idea that, or is the problem that the state needs to maintain control over its citizens, and the additional problem of its position within the global market. And as a result, labor still remains cheap in Vietnam. Employees are still paid poorly. You have a lot of issues with respect to workers' rights and things of this nature as a result, right? Because the party must maintain the state, and it can't really maintain the state and the current inflows of funds from capitalists with a particularly stringent employer policy, right? You can't have a lot of workers' rights when you're competing on a global stage. And as a result, because the labor unions have been run by the party which runs the state, they are also controlled and sort of limited in their effectiveness. And as a result, you have a lot of corruption, sweatshop conditions, and fairly dangerous work. And it's a fairly dangerous situation to be in. So because the General Confederation of Labor is controlled by the Communist Party, and ultimately, as a result, employers as well, the union rep can be just a human resources director for the factory, right? So there is that little control with respect to workers' rights. And so what they do is they engage in wildcat strikes at times. And to be clear here, a wildcat strike is, in the United States, an illegal strike that allows, that is not sort of allowed by the union, by the general union as a whole. Um, Strikes have to be authorized by specific unions, and if they're not, they're considered wildcat strikes, and they're illegal in the United States. But in Vietnam, because the state or government is the union, and the union is has a vested interest in sort of maintaining its control, and so does the state. All they have is wildcat strikes. The only strikes that you see in Vietnam are wildcat strikes, and that's it. And it seems to be having a pretty good impact. Wage growth has been moving faster than productivity growth, and there's general labor organization uh, by a wildcat strike. Vietnam has also signed on to Conventions 87 and 98, which are through the ILO, the International Labor Organization. And so Vietnam is slowly giving power back to their unions. What started this discussion off was the idea that there will now be independent unions not controlled through the Confederation coming to Vietnam shortly. And so that may open up an interesting situation in Vietnam and improve the working environment in Vietnam. But we'll see. Vietnam still very much cracks down on protests in labor protests inside the country. Despite strikes being illegal and despite the fact that the country often uses violence against protesters, there's still a lot of them. Some years that they might have 1,000 in a single year. It just depends on the situation. Oftentimes, these strikes are against foreign-owned companies, specifically South Korean and Taiwanese. And the most famous and most interesting one was at a factory that made toys for McDonald's. Uh, Nearly 9,000 employees walked off the job in 2005 at a Hong Kong owned factory in Vietnam. And there's been really a wave of wildcat strikes over and over again, which has led the Vietnamese government to put in place a minimum wage and increase the minimum wage at foreign-owned companies in 2006, 2007, etc. And it's really just sort of impressive the levels that the Vietnamese are willing to strike to, and even under a communist government, even under a government that technically doesn't allow it. Um, that said, with the recent development and change in law surrounding independent unions in Vietnam, you should see the strikes increase even further with the fact that the Confederation no longer has its hold on unions, and as a result, I expect to see an increase in labor union growth and an increase in workers' rights inside the country. This may lead other companies throughout the world to leave Vietnam, but they're currently leaving China and the area for Vietnam, and I tend to think that I tend to think that these strikes won't be as big of a concern uh, for those companies. Despite all of this, Vietnam has become a thriving economy, and it's got its workers' rights that are coming. It appears that it's making strong strides compared to other countries. However, it is still a communist country that you expect a lot better out of them in theory with respect to workers' rights, and we're not seeing it. I think the greater industrialization will lead to a better result, but I'm kind of surprised, and I'm kind of surprised how weak the labor union overall has been. That said, I think that Vietnam's future is bright in this arena. what do you think about today's video? Please comment down below, like, share, and subscribe. It really helps out. And I'll see you on the next one. Bye, guys.